Hello, everybody. We're going to talk about the 10 plagues, and you can find this in Exodus chapters 7 through 11. Now Moses took courage and marched into the royal palace, where the lamps were burning, and the huge columns toward in the dark he felt small. But he knew that God of all the earth was with him, for God had promised that Pharaoh would see his mighty hand at work. Now Moses and Aaron were once more ready to ask Pharaoh to free the Israelite slaves. Aaron threw his staff down before Pharaoh, where it suddenly twisted and buckled, and then slithered into the dark. Pharaoh stepped back in horror. But then his magicians, who were cunning, performed a conjuring trick with their staffs, turning them into little snakes. "Ha," said Pharaoh, "the gods of Egypt can do better than the feeble God of the Israelites." But then Aaron's staff swallowed all the other snakes in one mouthful, and he seized it by the tail, and it became a stick once again. But when they asked Pharaoh once again to free the Israelites, he refused to listen to them. "I will never let your people go, never," he shouted. The next morning Moses and Aaron went down to the river of Nile, where Pharaoh was bathing. Moses began, "This is what the Lord God of Israel says. If you do not let my people go, I will turn the river into blood, the fish will die, and no one will be able to drink the water." Pharaoh refused, and so Aaron stretched out his staff, and the whole river instantly turned to blood. Then the magicians performed their own tricks with a few bowls of water. Pharaoh again walked away, waving his hand, saying, "Never, I will never let your people go." So God brought more plagues on the land of Egypt. The second was a plague of frogs, coming out of the blood-red Nile, sliding into the houses of the Egyptians, into their beds, ovens, pots, and pans, everywhere. Then cried out Pharaoh, and for one moment he said to Moses, "I'll let your people go." But as soon as Moses brought the plague to an end, he changed his mind. He shouted, "No, never." So then came the lice, like dust clouds of insects rising, infesting everywhere, biting and swarming. The magicians could no longer copy the miracles. "This is the work of their God," they said fearfully, but Pharaoh would not listen. So God told Moses and Aaron to bring down another plague on Egypt, a plague of flies, black in the air, and clustered on the houses of the Egyptians, on their food and their livestock, everywhere except in the homes of the Israelites. Pharaoh promised to let them go, but when Moses freed the land of this plague, Pharaoh changed his mind once again. "No, never," he shouted stubbornly. Then came a plague on all the cattle and the sheep of the Egyptians. Then a plague of boils festering on all the Egyptians. Then a plague of hailstones hurling from the sky. The great stones lashed the trees, stripped them bare, and crushed the early crops to the ground. Seeing the devastation of his land, Pharaoh relented. "All right," he said, "I'll let you go. All the people can go." But when Moses lifted up his hands to stop the hail, Pharaoh changed his mind yet again. "No," he said furiously, gritting his teeth, "no, never." So then came a plague of locusts, a vast army of rustling wings and biting jaws, which stripped all the remains of the crops that were left from the hail, until Pharaoh himself was nearly choked from the invasion of these huge insects which filled the palace. "Moses and Aaron," he called, "forgive me, I have sinned. I will let your people go, this time I promise." So they brought that plague to an end, but once again Pharaoh's mind turned, his eyes grew dark, and his fist clenched on the side of his throne. "No," he shouted, "never, never." So Moses called down darkness, the ninth plague, a swirling cloud of thick darkness, for 3 days, until Pharaoh came to him in anger and despair. "Get out of my sight," he said. "If you ever come near me again, you will be killed." "Very well," said Moses, "you will never see me again. But because of your evil heart and your stubborn ways, the Lord, the God of Israel, will strike the firstborn son in every Egyptian household, from the firstborn of Pharaoh, who sits on the throne, to the firstborn son of the servant girl who grinds the corn. No one will escape, not even your cattle, but the Israelites will not be touched." Moses and Aaron walked away in anger and in sorrow, because they knew that Pharaoh would do nothing until death came to his own household. And that'll bring us to a lesson called the Passover, which you can, if you want to go ahead and start reading it, can find it in Exodus chapter 12. We will do that one next Tuesday because it follows up on this one with the 10 plagues. So we'll go ahead and name the 10 plagues. The first plague was the plague of the blood water. And the second one was a plague of the boils. The third was a plague of hail. Fourth was a plague of locusts. 5 was a plague of frogs. 6 was a plague of lice. 7 was a plague of flies. 8 was a plague of disease on cattle. 9 was a plague of darkness. And 10 was a plague of the death of the firstborn. You know, God's merciful, but he can be led to anger. And, he don't ask us to do much. I just don't understand people. And I don't understand the want and the willingness to fight what is right and what God wants. But I hope you all enjoyed it. Like I said, if you want to go ahead and start reading on our next lesson, it's in Exodus chapter 12. I will see you all Friday with fun facts, and I will see you next Tuesday with our lesson. I hope you enjoyed it. Please hit the like button and subscribe.